Hi, my name is Nils, co-founder of Dingy Studio. As both a seasoned web developer and UI designer with deep expertise in the web platform and modern design tools, I bridge the critical gap between design and development while leading our fully remote digital strategy team, helping organizations like yours create sustainable solutions that transform user experience into business success, especially as AI reshapes how we interact with technology. And for that, today I have my co-founder Daniel on the show, who experimented with custom AI applications over the course of the last couple months. And we started to really develop a couple of very interesting custom applications using AI. And we did that the way we always do it, with the deep understanding of the technology behind it. And in this episode, we want to use the chance to understand what Daniel learned in the last 6 months. So we'll be talking about things like what even is a large language model? What is a RAG? How can we utilize different APIs from different AI providers? What are the data privacy implications? What are the things that you have to pay attention to when considering custom AI applications? And with no further ado, let's take it on to the interview. Hey, Dan, welcome back to the show. We've seen you before. You want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, so as I said, my co-founder Daniel, we spoke about AI applications already last year, touched upon it when we started our excursion into custom AI applications. And this is what we're here to talk about today, I would say. What's the general premise on how will AI affect user experiences? This is our topic generally, as you know, if you've been listening to the podcast. And also, as you know, if you've been listening to the podcast before, is that we always try to look at user experience from a business perspective. What's the lift? What's the impact? Like, what do certain aspects of user experience design? How do they impact your KPIs? Like, what is a worthy investment and what might not be so important? And in this entire realm, we've been playing with custom AI applications more and more. And we've been working on another one. Like last year, we talked about this whole speech recognition and then filling out a form. We're going to touch upon that one too today, but we've also started to dabble in a new sort of application just as a R&D project really. And that's been how to interact with our own content. Dan, can you give us a little bit of an overview of what we're even talking about?
Yeah, so as Niels mentioned, we've been working with LLMs in general for quite a while. We started by doing the usual prompt engineering part where we learned how to write a proper prompt and try to get structured data out of LLMs. And we had a situation where we were internally wondering how to resurface information from our blog posts, basically, because we have quite a lot by now online. And it just happens that at some point somebody's like, hey, we wrote about this before, but how do I find this now?
Yeah.
In which article did we mention that?
Does someone remember where this is? Like, I know we talked about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On a parallel track, we're working a lot with structured content in general. Like, we're setting up data warehouses for our clients a lot, but also internally we persist much everything we do in like a structured data warehouse. And that got us thinking like, let's use an LLM to talk to our blog. And this idea led to us implementing basically this in a very, very, very simple and crude way at first, but it yielded immediate results, and that was really nice to see. Like the power is just there. Like you can just go ahead and do that, and that was fascinating because it took us an hour or so to get this done.
Really?
Yeah, like the very first version, but.
Let's take a step back. So just for everyone to understand, data warehouse in that sense, like we've been talking about that before on the podcast as well. And so the general idea is, and that's something that we advise our customers more and more. We started with that last year and even the one before, but we think the topic is getting more relevant moving forward. And the idea is to keep all of your company's knowledge as much in one central place as possible. So let's take the simple example of marketing and product, for example. Those are usually two different departments, but they sort of rely on each other. So product knows everything about the product, obviously, all the nitty-gritty details, text specs, titles, pictures, all of that sort of stuff. And marketing wants to talk about those products. Now, these two pieces of information, it would be massively beneficial if they exist in the same system and the two different departments work into that same system to maintain their information that they care about. So when product is working on the product, they should own the information about all of the different versions of the product, whatever, when it came out, when it was updated, when it was renamed or stuff like that. And marketing, without copy pasting, can use this sort of information. So we're talking about sort of a content management system, but for more than just the website people. And now what Daniel is saying is, could we have some sort of interface like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, where you literally ask a question? And I think the first question that we asked was, does it make sense to hire a UX researcher or something like that, right?
Yeah, we had a couple of test runs with questions that we know we answered before.
Yeah.
So we could validate that the output actually kind of made sense and that it was the actual content from the blog. So yeah, that was one of the first questions we asked.
And what did it say? Like, how did these tests go, sort of? Like you said, it took an hour to hook up. Like, we're going to get into the parts that it took in a minute. But so I think this is very curious and interesting that you can set something up this quickly and get an answer. So maybe you can describe that a little bit.
Yeah, the answer was basically a bullet list with most of the paragraphs that we had in the blog. It was reworded, of course, like in the language of the model. The bullet points overlapped greatly with what we had in the blog. And it's tricky to ensure that this is just the knowledge from the blog, because the LLM, of course, comes with its own body of knowledge. And as far as I know, we're not very good yet at filtering that out and directing the model to just use whatever is on the blog and use that knowledge exclusively. And also, there's a lot of blog posts in our blog that touch on UX research and you like the role of a UX researcher. So it's hard to go from one blog post and see like this is what the reply of the model was and this is what is in the blog, because there is several blog posts that it could have used, and we basically fed in all our blog. Like like the model is like the context window is large enough. I can just shove our whole blog in there, and it kind of works. It takes a while, but yeah, it kind of works.
Interesting. And so, yeah, maybe that's a good way. Oh, before we get into how this works or how you set this up, you told me that even like the answer is, well, it's something that the AI formulated itself. So it's not just copy pasting text paragraphs from blog posts or whatever. Like it's this experience that we all know by now. Like we're in the third year of ChatGPT release, I guess. And so by now, I think a lot of people know this experience of you just type something and ask for something, and like it feels a little funny. Like I think when we were all still Googling stuff, like everybody had their sort of tactic on how to set up keywords with the experience of what the results would look like. And at least like when I ask something, even if I do web research and I do that on Perplexity, for example, I still have the feeling that because I know it's an AI, that I can just go a little bit more broad. You know, I'm like, hey, how's it go? Like, I'm looking for this and that, and I'm providing context, like we are in the agency, this and that, and so on. And so the experience of that something custom to your question comes back in prose. I think that is very interesting already. But so the biggest uplift for me on Perplexity is that it gives you links to click on. Like it's sort of this enhanced web search, right? Like where you just see, oh, like it. So it's giving me this conclusion. Awesome. But I can click on stuff and then just go there. And we can do the same thing, right?
Yeah, this is like the next step we took then. Like the first version was just, as we have a cool data warehouse, I could just go in and get me the full text of whatever is in the blog on my command line, and use my command line to talk to OpenAI's API in this case, and just feed back in all the content we had in the blog and augment it with my custom prompt, where I was like, hey, take this information, read through it, and answer this question based on what you found.
Yeah.
A bit more than that, but kind of like this. Like I had a system prompt to direct it what to do. I had the content in the prompt, and then I had my actual question in there. And that worked reasonably well. But as I mentioned, this took a while because there's a lot of content in our blog and it needs to read through all of that. And this is all not very efficient because it also reads about other stuff that's in there that's not related to user research at all, or mostly not. So this also has an impact on the accuracy of the reply, because all of that suddenly is in the context window of the LLM and might end up in the response, even if it's not actually semantically related to what it's trying to answer.
Also, if we're generally talking about, I don't know, we have an article on web development or something, but we're talking about the concept of the interface or something, then that sort of information would kind of leak into this topic. Yeah, I see.
Depending on the model and so on. But I think this is all very, for me at least, very fuzzy. Like I don't have a good understanding of how this actually works. I know like the basic concepts, that it tries to find similar words or sentences and tries to reuse them. And this is then what the next step is basically trying to filter out information that is irrelevant and feed only relevant information into the context window. Like this is the next step. Oh. This is generally this is what's called a RAG, a Retrieval-Augmented Generation kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where you put stuff into the context of your prompt, so the LLM can work with that. And this is used, for example, if you, like each model has like cutoff date, the date where it was like released, and it can't have information that is younger than this model.
Yes.
Because it's just not part of the training data. And to accommodate for that, what you do is you take new knowledge and feed it into the model during your prompt. And then you have this RAG going on. And
so hold on, let's take a step back, because like we spoke a lot about AI, obviously, like since like you started dabbling with all of these custom applications and so on, but also each of us made our own experiences with different accessible AI applications like Perplexity and ChatGPT. But so maybe let's try to dissect the different terms a little bit, because even I do have the feeling that I'm a bit confused. So you already said stuff like context window. So there's context window, then training data and the implied cutoff date for this training data, RAG. And I know that there's a couple more terms. So could you explain a little bit like the bird's eye perspective of what you understand now? Like we're also still into our journey into all of this, of dissecting how it works. But I think if we can provide for our listeners and ourselves like an as easy as possible overview of the different parts of an AI even. Because like when we got into it, like I didn't know anything. I went to ChatGPT and you get this interface and stuff happens, right? And if you sometimes think, especially in the beginning, when you asked something that was too current, then or recent, then exactly what you said, like then it says you, well, my cutoff date is July 24. And you're like, okay, so now what? So where do we start? Like maybe let's start with the training data. Like how does that work? Like what's the model and what do we use and where can we get that stuff?
So I'm probably not the most suitable person to explain these terms because I also don't know a lot about it. As you said, I'm just learning, as well right now. But basically what I understand as the model is the full logic that, takes a prompt and, responds with a answer to that prompt. And this is what I understand is the model, the large language model. And the large language model is basically, a condensed or like highly compressed version of the training data that got fed into the model when it was created. And the training data is, as far as I know, just a whole lot of content that's scraped from the internet and other sources. And then I think there's a huge part of the training data is that it gets cleaned up a lot. So there's a lot of manual labor going into ensuring that the data is correct, that the data is like there's no typos in there, stuff like that, because all of that could influence the quality of the results. So that happens before it gets put into this model, and then inside of the model, but this is already fairly technical. Before it goes into the model, it's split up into tokens. And these tokens are like, could be sentences, but it could also be words. And I think, as far as I know, it's mostly like graphemes or like parts of words. And you can then, if you have these tokens, you can compare these tokens and find similarities between them and trade-offs between the granularity of tokens and the precision with which you can compare them and so on.
I see. So, okay. So if any one of us reads the headline of OpenAI or Anthropic or Google or whoever has this new model, then what they did was to somehow gather a whole bunch of training data off the public internet, of whatever they can get their hands on, I guess, have this step in between where they clean out everything that they don't want, where they maybe correct grammar and like make this as useful and correct as possible. That's a step I didn't know about before, by the way. Like I just thought they had random web scrapers going on and feeding all of that stuff into the training right away. And I always wondered, like, I mean, we all love the internet, but there's a lot of stuff out there that is probably not necessarily correct in that way. And then they use a whole bunch of computing power to make up this model, so to say, like to create all of these tokens. And then we heard about the size of a model and that this is so much and so much bigger than the one before or whatever, then it means this model has more training data, more tokens that it can look through, so to say.
I think there's also the technical aspect of how this model works and like how it's programmed to work so that it can actually traverse all that data and do that with computing power that is available and not just blast through memory and CPU power and
I see.
Consume everything it can get. But I don't feel comfortable about explaining that because I don't know. I actually don't know. Like this is a black box for me. This is just what I understood from reading about it.
Okay, so I mean, I agree. Like, let's not get too technical, but so a model is basically like this finished product, sorta, that has like a lot of logic built into it and it's been trained on a whole bunch of data. And then you can, and that's my next question, you can have it. I mean, like the general approach is we go to ChatGPT and just talk to it, and it's on OpenAI's servers or whatever. So what about custom applications like this? Like, is the only option to use their API, or can we actually have our own model? Like, people are talking about hosting their own models. Do you have any insight of what that means even? Like, what does that mean?
And so I think you can think about having your own model by downloading a model that is available for download. I don't think an OpenAI model is available like that, but there are others. And then you can run it on your computer, like you can run an application on your computer. So that actually works. These models are by now fairly big, so you load gigabytes of data. And you also need a lot of memory on your machine. So they consume like the model size determines how much memory you need. And some of them you can run on a usual MacBook. Some of them you need like a couple of machines to run.
Yeah, like a bigger server infrastructure or something.
Yeah, exactly. In this realm, there's a lot of stuff happening right now. I think models got fairly big, but now are also getting more efficient. So it is possible to run fairly good models on a M series MacBook already. So this is what you can, like, what's referred to hosting your own model. Like, you can put it on a data center. You can run it on your MacBook or another notebook for that matter. But there's obvious limitations in what you can have on your desktop computer versus what you can have in a data center, of course.
Sure.
But when we talk, like the usual way how you get started is you get an account with OpenAI or Anthropic, or another provider, and you generate an API key, and then you use their API, their interface to talk to their model. And the API that OpenAI established is by now, I think, the quasi standard of what we're using to talk to these models. Like, most APIs look fairly similar. So you can change models fairly easily. What's really nice, because you can write an application, try it out with OpenAI, then switch to Anthropic or Mistral and see if the results differ and how they differ.
And so our example now with blog posts that are in our content warehouse and so on, like our application or where this came from was, well, this little discussion that we have of, hey, we have knowledge on this. Like, didn't we have a blog post about this to send to someone to, I don't know, to somehow not repeat yourself is, I guess, one notion in this whole, or like part of the motivation. Our data is public, like it's blog posts. And so I don't have this feeling of, oh, what happens with this information when we use the API of ChatGPT or whatever. So if people would like to create this application for themselves where they maybe, I don't know, have an interface like that to chat with your intranet or with more internal information, do you have some sort of feeling or take or hot take even on the data privacy implications? Is this generally crazy to use a public API like ChatGPT? Should you host your own model? Is this like, do you have anything in this direction? I don't know.
No, I actually don't. I think similar things apply to this as do apply to all the data out there. Like I would try to not send it out if it's like critical data to your business or if there is personal data in there. I could see several ways to go about this. Like, one obvious one is to just redact the data that is sensible. then the question is that even helpful to send that data over to the model? Another obvious answer would be to use one of the open models that you can self-host and self-host them in a way that you can ensure that it's not communicating with the internet and sending out all this data. I guess all the AI companies are very, very interested in your data because, as we talked about before, the training data is crucial for the quality of the results. So they're trying to get a hold of a lot of data to train their models. And part of this loop to develop better models is like a feedback with their users. When you use OpenAI, you can see like this thumbs up button or thumbs down button to tell them, hey, this was not helpful at all, or this was really helpful, this worked well, or you can toggle through different versions of the same response, and they will use that data to inform the quality of their models. So I'm very sure they try to use whatever you send them
to train
train or improve their models. That doesn't mean they use personal data or data you send over in a nefarious way, or that it ends up in a new model. But at least the high level information about this data might inform how they build the next model and so on. So depending on the data you have, you should be careful, I guess.
I see. And so generally, to me, this sounds a little bit like you're saying it's a similar decision. If you think your data is too sensitive to use Google Business Suite and to store documents on Google Drive, is that like a similar take? Like if there's an option to say, don't use my data for training of new models, I think there's like right? Like that's a discussion that you can say that. So if you trust this option, then it may be just like a similar decision of which SaaS product to use.
Yeah, totally. Like they all have like policies around that. There's compliance and legal agreements with you as the customer and them as business. So as far as you trust this, there shouldn't be a problem.
So you don't, but I think this is very interesting because I had many conversations where people said, well, but I mean, I would love to use this, but we can't. Like this is going to end up in all of the AI knowledge. This is our intellectual property. We can't, and so on and so on. So I think this is a very key information. But
not legal advice at all.
Not legal advice. But I mean, so just the fact that there's a lot of policies around this, like how will your data, like I know, for example, we're using GitHub Copilot a lot to program stuff. Like I've also played with the Anthropic API a little bit. And so there's, different AI applications have different settings of what happens to your knowledge. And it's possible to say, you can't use this information for model training. End of story.
Depending on the provider.
Obviously, but also, so this is, I think, this is an important information for people considering to build custom applications using available APIs, because I guess it's cool to host your own model, but it's similar to hosting your own mail server. Like you can do that, but it's,
I think it's actually fairly straightforward by now. Like there's a lot of people trying that out, and the environments to do that get better every day. Like it's a very fast moving area of engineering right now. So there's a lot of stuff happening. I think generally, as soon as there is like intellectual property that you don't want out there, and as soon as especially if there's personal data, there is a lot of due diligence to be had, I think. It also comes down to like who's a trusted partner out there, and like we know that some AI companies didn't take into account the copyright quite as much as
huge discussion.
Some people would have liked. So
absolutely.
I think there is discussions to be had, and there are discussions still ongoing. So yeah.
Right on. So like if you're thinking about custom applications that somehow work with your company's knowledge, consider the platform, like consider their privacy policy, get a sense of their terms. Like there's enough players by now also that you really have a choice, right? Like I'm saying ChatGPT all the time, but by now there's a whole bunch of players, right? Like I would say, with Gemini, Claude, and ChatGPT, there's like 3 huge ones, like from our big tech friends, so to say. But just last month, we had this release of DeepSeek, which was very interesting for a bunch of reasons, I guess. And there's, like you mentioned, that there's a lot of open source and smaller models that also get more popular and bigger over time. So it sounds to me like you really do have a choice depending on your application and requirements.
And it's also, it might make sense from a technical perspective to not use one of these big models, because especially I think the O1 model by OpenAI is fairly expensive. Once it starts going, it consumes a lot of tokens that you pay for.
Yeah.
And there's, depending on what you're trying to do, a smaller model might just work and might be more efficient in doing so and might need less resources and have a lower environmental impact, which is also a thing to consider with all these models. And so there's good reasons to evaluate different models.
So I think we fairly we cleared up what's a model, like how and how do you get one, like how do you interact with one.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, but so roughly you decide for a model, but like you decide for a provider, you decide for a model by this provider, like they can be smaller, bigger, more expensive, less expensive. There's considerations about terms and conditions, privacy, how is the data handled, what's their take on all of this, how do they train new models, so there's all of these considerations to be had. Moving like one layer deeper, you said you took all of our blog posts and put them into the context or the context window. So like, what do people have to know about this? Or like, what sort of next steps would you see in our journey to make this research project a little bit more fine-grained?
Yeah, so we actually worked on that already and took the next step. But going back to the context window, so we mentioned these tokens where your text is split up into different tokens that then can be compared with whatever the model has internally.
Yeah.
I think
so
this is
words,
this
parts
is putting
of
it
words.
Way simpler than it actually is, but
I'm sure. Yeah. But I think that helps.
Each of your model, each model has a so-called context window where you I think that's how it's called. That determines how many tokens you can have per prompt or per chat, and how many tokens it can consume from your input and how many tokens it can output. So the longer your prompt gets, the more tokens you use, and so the longer the output might be. But then at some point you'll hit a limit where the model decides to just not do any further work or to truncate data.
Oh.
And if you use like a blog like ours with like 100 posts or something that are all like a 3 to 10 minutes read, then there's a lot of data in there that, I don't know, a year ago or 2 years ago might not have fit into the context window. Like with the newer models, this works because they have like huge context token limits. But so that kind of worked. The next step to optimize for that is to not feed the whole blog in there, but just the blog posts that are relevant to your question.
So if we think about if you're sitting in, you're doing the manual chat interface thing, you can imagine you have the window to prompt something, to type your text, and you can kind of provide more information, upload a whole bunch of text files. Or something.
Yeah, you can just copy paste all the manual way to go about it and this is not different from what I did on the command line, would be to go into the blog, copy each blog post, paste it into the little text box.
Oh, really? Like just
and then
paste them all in there, like
paste them all in, and then add your prompt at the end. And
I see.
Maybe you can use like markers to tell it, hey, this is one article, this is the next one, this is the next one, this is the title. You can do stuff like that. And this helps to give the model context about what it's looking at.
Yeah.
And then you tell it to read through each article, choose the ones that are relevant to the question, and then answer the question based on what it found from these articles.
So it doesn't matter, like, if you're using the fancy interface to upload text files, that's like, if you copy paste them in there, or if you attach them, like, what comes out of it is sort of the same. Like, that is, you're putting stuff in this context window for the model to work with, sort of.
Yeah, so there's probably some pre-processing. They try to use as much data as possible from the actual text file. Like, there's metadata in there. Stuff like that probably happens, but generally speaking, I think this is what will happen. Yeah. And now what you could do is go through each blog post and decide for yourself, is this relevant to my question, and just paste the blog posts that are. And then you already have the model can focus on that. It doesn't need to read through a lot of stuff that's irrelevant. And the result is probably better then. So what you're doing with the RAG is that you're building a system that does this selection for you, that tries to, as a pre-processing step, browses through all the blog posts and tries to find similarities between your question and the content in the blog posts, and then extract only these blog posts that are relevant and add them to your prompt automatically. This is like the broad definition of what a RAG is.
So a RAG, you have the model, that's one thing. And a RAG is like another thing that's sort of next to the model. And you ask something, and instead of just like dumping the entire context right onto the model right away, you go through this middle layer of things. Sort of?
Yeah, so I think RAG, the most simple version of a RAG is basically copying over all the blog posts. But okay, as this has limitations in token limits and so on that are like, they matter less nowadays, but they still matter. Like, if you have very long blog posts, it won't work. It's just too much information, and the result will be mediocre. So if we talk about a RAG nowadays, I think we talk about a pipeline to actually select relevant content, feed that into the context for you. And this is like a two-step process, as you said. Like, you first feed the question into your RAG. It comes up with a bunch of relevant data, and this gets fed into the model. And this, like, the model does the reasoning about all this. Like, it reasons about the context from the RAG and your question, and tries to come up with a good answer.
And can we think of a RAG like a database or something? Or like, how does a RAG look, you know?
I don't know, but I also don't think there's it's strictly defined what a RAG is, but you can think of it as a folder with text files and a script to take your question and find similar words in these text files. Then select these text files, take the content and put it into your prompt and send this over to the API. Take the result and send this back to you.
So it's a little bit like a intermediary search engine almost. It's like something that can filter all of your stuff and knows about all of your stuff too, right? So all of your knowledge and content that you want the model to work on is accessible by this RAG, sort of. So, and you ask something, and then this goes to the RAG, and it goes looking basically in your gigantic library of stuff, whatever you made available, and can then pre-select things and have the model reason about it, so to say.
In this is mostly being done in a similar fashion as the actual functionality of the model. So it uses the same principles where it tokenizes your input and then compares the input to a tokenized version of all your documents, because that makes it easy to find semantic similarities, not just like the exact same word in the document, but rather like the broader context of how it appears and so on.
I think all of this is really like having been in, computer science or web development for the bigger part of my life, and having seen the internet become a thing when I was 10 or something. I think it's pretty mind-boggling where we are today and what how this is really a paradigm shift in how computers work, sort of. It's really nuts what's possible, I have to say. Maybe to come to a close with this episode, I'm sure we're going to talk about this more, because apart from that, it's very interesting to understand how AI works generally. Our mission, of course, is to make applications that somehow improve the user experience in any sort of way. If you're building this for your end customers, awesome. If you're building this for your staff internally or both or whatever. But I think we're really on fire to understand how user experiences in general are going to change because of the availability of all these technologies now, right? And we're talking to our content warehouse, which is pretty awesome. I think this is super cool that we can, and now we're just doing our content warehouse. I mean, we could, as it is with other data warehouses, pull in more sources, right? And make this available in a unified way to the RAG, as we learned now. Do you have a couple visions or ideas where this could be heading in the future, just to for our listeners' minds to go nuts a little bit?
Yeah, I think what we found, or what I found interesting from our work with it, is that there is still very few applications that have a very tight integration with the LLM on an interface level. It's either you have the chatbot kind of interface where you have a conversation, or you have the same thing but only on a message level. And this is what we do when we program with a Copilot system, where we can ask it to do a certain task and it will come back with code. But it's also, then you're in a chat that's limited to one message, basically. And then you have the auto-completion stuff where your sentence is completed for you, if you like. This is also not super, it's not a novel idea. We've had this in Gmail, I think, for a couple of years already.
It might just be a little bit better. Potentially.
Yeah, it improves, of course. But what I find interesting is that there's, as far as I know, little actual innovation in how user interfaces are built to account for these possibilities. And it's also something that we found in our work to be very tricky to do. So there's a lot of stuff that might happen in the future, and I'm very excited for that, because I think we had this example of filling out a structured form using your voice. And we had a couple of iterations for the interface that all worked more or less, but none really clicked with the users. And I think we're getting there, but it's also still very tricky to communicate through affordances and so on what will happen when you use the voice control and what you're supposed to tell us and all that stuff.
Because it's so novel, right? People literally don't know. They're looking at a form. I think that's what you told me before recording this episode. People know forms. They've been around for 30 years now. So forms, okay. We also know this conversational thing now, since 2 or 3 years, that you can apparently have a spoken or written conversation. But our first version was literally form, and at the end of it, a mic button, right? And I remember that you told me people thought, so in the free text part of this form, I can now use like the dictation feature, so I don't have to type. But there was no, like, they didn't think that this mic button means that they can fill out the entire form by just talking.
Yeah. And this is still, I think, one of the main issues we have with this interface, that the location of the microphone button and the interface to record your voice is very, like, determines how people understand what's going to happen.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think it's testimony to the size of the tectonic shift that we're looking at here, because like also said this a couple times now already, but like I found this really very interesting comment, like, hi mom. But so she told me she never clicked with computers because there was never like a gray area. Like there was no, either it works or it doesn't work. Right? Like you can also, when you click around, like the concept of windows being on top of each other and you can only right click on whatever, like all of this sort of stuff that we're used to, where the computer just, you can use what's provided in the interface or you can stop. That's like, there's no inventing new things on a whim. There's nothing in between. And now there is an in between. Like you can just talk about stuff and it will give you an opinion. It's not 100%. It's like whatever. It's also as good as the context that you provided. But like, I think the fact that especially a form that is like very structured, like it's name and first name and address. And we all know that it has to be correct. Otherwise our parcel won't arrive or we're flying to the wrong city or whatever. So like forms are high stakes because we're giving something. Right? And that you now are supposed to just talk for 5 minutes and it comes out to fill out this thing to be correct. I think this is just, it shows that people are not quite sure yet what to do with this AI stuff, right? Like in how it will change their way of interacting with computers.
And I think this is one of the, or is some of the feedback that we get is that, this process is not a trusted process by now. So people want to fill out the form by typing because they then know it's correct.
Yes.
And there's no concept of this being like 80% correct. And then it's still easier to fill out the form correctly afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's either I talk into like a free-form text field and it's all right if there's a typo or I don't know, wrong information in there because it's just a nodes field.
Yeah.
But for a form, I want to make sure. And for that, I use the keyboard or like the typing on my phone.
Interesting. We could go on with this forever, I guess. And we're gonna, but in future episodes. Like, I think this is already a lot of information for one episode. Thank you, Dan, for coming on. Thank you for dissecting this in the little pieces that they are. And we're gonna continue our R&D into how to answer these questions. 'Cause I think, they're going to be the relevant questions for the next couple of years on the internet of where stuff is moving, how we're interacting with things, with phones and whatever we have today. Like maybe we won't have a phone in 10 years. Who knows? Who knows? So exciting stuff. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. See you on the next one. Bye.